What's going on, everybody? Khalipa's Tech here, coming back at you with another video. In this video, we're going to be doing a quick comparison between the Motorola Moto G Power 5G and the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G. Now, as always, if you do end up wanting to learn more about either phone individually, be sure to check out the description, where I will be linking to several other videos about them, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But with that being said, let's get into it. So with the Motorola Moto G Power 5G, we're getting a 6.5-inch 120Hz IPS LCD display with a 1080p resolution, a PPI of 405, and a 20:9 aspect ratio. With the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G, we're getting a 6.5-inch 120Hz Super AMOLED display, and this phone also has a 1080p resolution, a PPI of 405, and a 20:9 aspect ratio as well. So in almost every way, these displays are actually pretty much the same. They're the same size, same dimensions, which at 6.5 inches with a 20:9 aspect ratio, definitely good for consuming content. So if you're doing something like reading, things are going to show up real nice here. And with taller and more narrow form factors, the scrolling experience is going to be pretty good too. With 1080p resolutions, the displays are going to be nice and sharp. And with 120Hz refresh rates, with these phones, the movement on the screen is going to be a bit faster and smoother, making them feel a bit more premium to use. Really, the only difference between the two here is the display technology. On one hand, with the Moto G Power 5G, an IPS LCD is definitely not bad. In fact, for a more affordable mid-range phone, it's pretty common. But with the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G, the Super AMOLED does give it a bit of an advantage. With this kind of display technology, the display is going to be a bit brighter in general, the colors are a bit more vibrant, and the viewing angles are significantly better. So if you're outside in the sun, for example, or really in any kind of bright area, the A53 5G is going to be a bit easier to see. But again, other than that, the displays are pretty much the same. So if you are looking for a more affordable phone that has a really nice display, despite the A53 5G having a bit of an advantage when it comes to display technology, you're really not going to go wrong with either phone here. Now for storage, with the Moto G Power 5G, we're getting 256GB of internal storage with microSD card expansion, and with the A53 5G, or at least this version in my hand, we're getting 128GB with microSD card expansion as well. But keep in mind, the Moto G Power 5G in my hand is the factory unlocked version, and while as of the recording of this video, I don't think any US carriers have this phone, I know they eventually will, and if you get this phone from like Cricket, for example, I doubt it's actually going to have 256GB, probably something like 128. And in addition to this, with the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G, despite this phone in my hand having 128GB, which to be fair is the version you're most commonly going to find, there is another variant that does have 256. So on one hand, for this specific comparison, the Moto G Power 5G does have a huge advantage, having double the storage of the A53 5G. Depending on the variants of each phone you get, this could easily be switched. But regardless, both phones do have plenty of storage for the average user, so either way, you're really not going to go wrong. For security features, both phones have Face Unlock, and they both have fingerprint scanners. With the Moto G Power 5G, it's right here on the power key, and with the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G, it's in the display. But starting with the Moto G Power 5G, let's give them a try. There we go, one more time. And there we go. And now for the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G. There we go, one more time. And there we go. So as you can see there, both fingerprint scanners worked real well. And again, remember, both phones have Face Unlock too. So if you want to use that instead, you always can. Now for the camera setups, with the Moto G Power 5G, up front, we got a 16 megapixel selfie camera. Then on the back, we got a triple camera setup with a 50 megapixel main camera, a 2 megapixel depth sensing camera, and a 2 megapixel macro camera. For video, this phone has a max recording quality of 1080p in both the rear and front cameras, so no 4K here. With the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G, up front, we got a 32 megapixel selfie camera. Then on the back, we got a quad camera setup with a 64 megapixel main camera, a 12 megapixel ultra wide camera, a 5 megapixel macro camera, and a 5 megapixel depth sensing camera. And then for video, this phone can record 4K videos in both the rear and front cameras, so definitely great to see there. In general, both phones have great camera setups here, and for the average user, if you're taking photos for really anything, whether you're doing stuff for like Instagram, for example, Twitter, sending photos to friends and family, or just taking maybe vacation photos for your own memories, regardless, no matter what you're doing, the camera quality with these phones is going to be great. But when it comes to features, the A53 5G does have an advantage, since again this phone does have an ultra wide camera, whereas unfortunately the Moto G Power 5G doesn't. And again, the A53 5G can record 4K videos, while the Moto G Power 5G does max out at 1080p. Now that being said, these features may or may not be that important to you. It really just depends on how you're using your camera, but if you do want a few more features overall, the A53 5G will have an advantage. To give you an idea of what they can do, first, here's some pictures taken with the Moto G Power 5G. Overall, for what it is, the photo quality is great here. Again, I feel like for pretty much anything, for the average user, camera, the photo quality here will most likely be good enough for you. Now, of course, if you're really taking a lot of pictures and that's more the main thing you're doing with your phone, then yeah, you could probably justify spending a bit more and getting something higher end, like a Samsung Galaxy S21 FE or a Google Pixel 6a, that takes more along the lines of flagship quality photos. But again, I feel like for the average user, a phone like the Moto G Power 5G is going to be perfectly fine. And then here's some pictures taken with the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G, and really same kind of thing. I feel like the photo quality between these two phones is pretty comparable. So overall, if you are more of an average user, then for everyday basic use, I feel like either camera here will be perfectly fine. For the RAM and processor, with the Moto G Power 5G, we're getting 6GB of RAM with the MediaTek Dimensity 930 processor. With the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G, this phone is also getting 6GB of RAM with the Samsung Exynos 1280. Now when it comes to overall performance, between the two you're not really going to see an insane difference. Both phones are really fast for what they are. Now, keep in mind, these are mid-range phones. It's not like these phones are going to be anywhere near as fast as like a $1,000 flagship phone, for example. But at the same time, considering they are more affordable options for most everyday tasks like browsing the web, using social media, streaming content like videos and music, and maybe playing a game or two, either phone will be perfectly fine. That being said though, between the two, I would say the Moto G Power 5G is a little bit faster. Now, keep in mind this difference is definitely not huge, and if you get the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G instead, you're still not going to go wrong with this phone, and it's not really going to feel slow in comparison. But at the same time, if you're going to be on your phone a bit more, you might get a slightly smoother experience with the Moto G Power 5G. Now I did run a benchmark test on each phone using Geekbench 6, and here are the results I got. So again, as you can see here, overall the Moto G Power 5G has a slight advantage, but again, it's not really an insane difference, and if you end up with the A53 5G, performance-wise, you're really not going to go wrong with this phone either. So at the end of the day, if you're looking for an affordable mid-range phone that has good performance for everyday use, either phone here will be a great choice. Now both phones here have 5000 mAh batteries, with the Moto G Power 5G supporting 15W fast charging, and the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G supporting 25. So great batteries here. With either phone, you can expect to get great battery life and longevity. So if you're in a situation where maybe you're not always around a charger, but you still need to use your phone all day, for that kind of use, either phone here will be a great choice. When it comes to charging speed, clearly with the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G supporting again 25W fast charging versus only 15 with the Moto G Power 5G, the A53 5G will have slightly better charging speed, but keep in mind with this phone, and the Moto G Power for that matter, to actually use the full charging speed, you will of course need a 25W charger, which this phone does not come with. In fact, it doesn't even come with a wall adapter. And even with the Moto G Power 5G, to actually use the 15W charging, you will need a 15W charger, so definitely keep this in mind. But in general, in my experience, despite the A53 5G technically supporting better fast charging, even with the Moto G Power 5G, I have found the charging speed to be pretty good. For the software, both phones do have Android 13, so that's great to see. But when it comes to software support, I feel like the Samsung has a bit of an advantage. With this phone, you can expect to get Android 14, 15, and 16, whereas with the Moto G Power 5G, I'm pretty sure this phone will eventually get Android 14, if not 15 too. Motorola's software support, despite not being the best, has definitely gotten better, at least for their 5G phones in the past couple years. But at the same time, if you really want software support you can actually rely on, I would definitely choose a Samsung over a Motorola. When it comes to other features, keep in mind with the Moto G Power 5G, we are actually getting a headphone jack, whereas unfortunately, the A53 5G does not have a headphone jack. So if you have a normal pair of 3.5mm headphones you want to use, the Moto G Power 5G will have an advantage. Another thing to keep in mind though is that unfortunately, the Moto G Power 5G does not have NFC, whereas the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G does. So if you like to use tap and pay, you will want to go with the A53 5G. Now, honestly, this really doesn't make sense to me because with the Moto G Power 5G, I mean, yeah, this phone is pretty affordable, going for around $299, but honestly, every other 5G phone in this price range has NFC, whereas for some reason, Motorola didn't give this phone NFC, and seeing that NFC or tap and pay is becoming so popular and widely used, at least in the US. I mean, at this point in 2023, you're probably not going to walk into many stores that don't have some sort of tap and pay, so I feel like NFC in smartphones at this point is really an expectation. But again, keep in mind, between these two, if you do want to use tap and pay, at least the A53 5G does have it. But in conclusion, which of these phones is better? Now, in general, I feel like there are really not that many differences between these two. That being said though, I feel like despite it being a year older, I would say the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G has most of the advantages here. Despite the displays being nearly identical, again, the A53 5G does have a Super AMOLED, which definitely helps with the image quality and overall brightness. The phones also have really similar cameras, but with the A53 5G, we are getting an ultra-wide camera, and again, this phone can record 4K 4K videos, which is something that unfortunately the Moto G Power 5G can't do. The A53 5G also definitely has better software support, so in the long run, you will get more major updates. And again, it does have NFC too, so with this phone you can actually use tap and pay. On the other hand, with the Moto G Power 5G, this phone, or at least this version of it, does have more storage, and it does have a headphone jack too, which for some people might be more of an important feature. But in general, again, in most ways, despite the A53 5G technically being the better device here, the Moto G Power 5G is really barely far behind. And I almost forgot, again, this phone does have slightly better performance too, so if you want the faster device between the two, then in that case, you might want to go with the Moto G Power 5G. But at the end of the day, if you're looking for an affordable 5G phone that has a great camera, a really nice display, decently fast performance, a ton of storage, a large battery, and the latest version of Android, you're really not going to go wrong with either phone here. But this concludes my comparison between the Motorola Moto G Power 5G and the Samsung Galaxy A53 5G. Again, if you want to learn more about either phone individually, definitely check out the description, where I am linking to several other videos about them, as well as some information about pricing, availability, and some of my favorite smartphone accessories. But that's it for this video. If you enjoyed it and found it useful, be sure to give it a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to follow Kalipa's Tech on Twitter and Instagram. And as always, I will see you in the next video.